Welcome to the Rogue Risk Analysis webinar series presented by Apogee Global RMS. Apogee Global is an integrated enterprise risk management firm headquartered in San Jose, California. The firm advises commercial and public sector organizations on the convergence of cyber, physical, and human capital risk, a discipline referred to as the Nexus of Risk. The Rogue team is Apogee's intelligence research practice. The team produces advisories, briefings, and forward-looking analysis designed to help executives and boards anticipate risk rather than react to it. This webinar series brings that work directly to the practitioner community. Each session examines an issue shaping today's risk landscape and translates it into decisions that leaders can act on. Today's session will be led by M.K. Palmore, founder and principal advisor at Apogee. He brings 3 decades of cybersecurity and enterprise risk leadership, spanning a distinguished career as an FBI special agent and senior executive. His enterprise experience included work as a VP and field chief information security officer at Palo Alto Networks and senior cybersecurity leadership at Google Cloud. Please welcome M.K. Palmore.
Thank you, and good morning. I want to open with a question, not a rhetorical one, a real one. One I'd like you to sit with for a moment before I give you my answer. Who is managing the space between your risk domains? Your organization manages cyber risk. Your organization manages physical risk. Your organization manages the risk around your people. Each one has an owner. Each one has a budget. Each one has a reporting line. But the biggest organizational failures of the past decade didn't start inside any one of those buckets. They started at the intersections, where cyber met physical, where physical met people, where a failure in one area spilled into the next and grew into a crisis. I'm going to give you a thesis this morning. One sentence. If your risk program can't see those intersections, it can't protect you from the threats that matter most. Now, I want to be precise here because what I'm about to describe isn't a new framework. It's putting into practice something the risk management community has already agreed upon, but hasn't actually put into practice. 2 standards. The Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, Enterprise Risk Management, in its 2017 update, and the International Organization for Standardization, ISO 31000, the International Standard for Risk Management, in its 2018 update. Both of them say explicitly that risks don't exist in isolation. They interact, they pile up, they create new exposures that are bigger than the sum of the parts. The theory is settled. It's been settled for nearly a decade. But how organizations actually practice risk management is still stuck in silos. And the reason about thinking, it's about structure. The organizational chart itself enforces the silo. Your head of cybersecurity, your chief information security officer, sits under the head of technology. Your head of physical security or head of facilities sits under operations. Your head of HR sits under talent or legal or compliance. 3 reporting lines, 3 budgets, 3 vendors, 3 separate assessments. And not one of them is accountable for the space between them. The Nexus of Risk thesis starts there. It accepts COSO. It accepts ISO 31000. It doesn't argue with the theory. What it does is turn the theory into something a board can actually use, a method, a set of tools, and a way to govern. Let me describe what siloed approach actually looks like and produces. Because from a distance, 3 well-run risk programs sound like a complete risk program. They're not. They produce 3 failures built into the structure that get worse over time. The first gap is exposure at the seams. Separate vendors deliver clean reports. Neither one looks at the space between. And the vulnerabilities that get exploited most often live right there in the spaces no one was hired to look at. The second is duplicate cost and conflicting advice. 3 vendors, 3 different models, 3 sets of recommendations, each one optimized for its own lane and often in direct conflict with the others. Leadership is left to sort it out without a common operating picture. The third is the one that matters the most at the board level: leadership blind spots. Your executives get domain-specific reports showing progress. What they don't get is a combined risk picture. The board sees 3 green dashboards, while the risk that matters most goes unaddressed. That's the problem this framework is designed to solve. So let me state the thesis clearly. Cyber risk, physical risk, risk around your people, these are not independent categories. They're connected by cause and effect. And the way they interact creates exposures that pile up in ways no single discipline assessment can see or manage. I want to emphasize the word cause. This isn't a claim about correlation. The Nexus thesis says something stronger. It says that failures in one area actively create, enable, and worsen failures in the next through clear chains of cause and effect. A gap in workforce training doesn't just correlate with phishing exposure, it causes it. A flaw in your network architecture doesn't just correlate with physical access being compromised, it enables it. And the practical point of that distinction is the whole game. You can act on cause and effect. You can see it coming. You can trace it, and you can break it at the root. Let me define the 3 pillars, because these are the areas where cascading failures start and spread. This is the engine of the whole problem. Cyber risk, network security, data protection, access and identity management. Who has the keys to what? Cloud security, application security, security for industrial systems, the operational technology that runs factories, utilities, and building control, incident response, regulatory compliance. The usual owner, your head of cybersecurity. Now, let's take physical risk, which include facility security, access control, environmental monitoring, business continuity infrastructure, contractor and visitor management, security across distributed sites, travel security, the usual owner, your head of physical security, or your head of facilities. Now, what about risk around your people? Too much concentration in key roles, insider threat, workforce governance, succession planning, training gaps, the capacity to make decisions in a crisis, the usual owner, your head of HR. And here's the observation that matters most. Not one of those 3 owners is typically responsible for understanding how their area interacts with the other 2. That built-in gap is what the Nexus framework is designed to close. Cyber crossed with physical. Connected devices and industrial systems that bridge the digital and physical worlds. A cyber attack that halts physical operations. Physical access to a facility that opens the door to a network compromise. Every modern manufacturing floor, every utility, every smart building lives in this zone. Cyber crossed with people. Privileged access in the hands of a disengaged employee. Phishing exposure driven by cultural gaps. Leadership without the competency to make decisions during a cyber incident. Every one of those is a cross-domain risk that you can't see inside either lane by itself. Physical, crossed with people. Warning signs of workplace violence missed across fragmented HR and facilities reporting. Safety culture that erodes when leadership turns over. Those don't show up on a cyber dashboard. They shouldn't have to. And the most dangerous of all, when all 3 meet, a compromised insider uses their physical access to a facility to steal data or disrupt systems, no single domain assessment captures the full attack chain. 3 separate assessments, viewed separately, don't catch it either. Let me make this concrete. Think about an organization. Any organization, this pattern isn't industry specific, where 3 separate findings land on 3 different desks in the same quarter. Let's start with the HR finding. Turnover is up, and it's driving shortcut onboarding. Rated medium. The cyber finding. Phishing awareness scores are dropping year over year. Also rated medium. The physical security finding. Credentials for the building management system are shared among facility staff. This is also rated a medium risk to the enterprise. 3 medium findings, 3 separate reports, 3 separate timelines for fixing them, each one pushed down the priority list on its own merits. Now, let me show you what happens when they combine. Shortcut onboarding means a new maintenance contractor gets credentials without being fully vetted. That contractor falls for a phishing email. Password that gets stolen opens the door to the building management system. The attacker moves through that system into the operational network that runs production. Ransomware deploys across the plant. Each area contributed a medium finding on its own. Put together, they produced a critical multi-million-dollar event. That's the nexus of risk in action. And no single domain assessment, however well run, would have seen it coming. The pattern repeats across industrial, cross-organization types. I've watched versions of this exact chain unfold inside Fortune 500 manufacturers, regional hospitals, and certainly local government networks. 3 pillars are enough to describe where risk starts. They're not enough to describe the full landscape a board has to govern. The standard risk management frameworks, COSO, ISO 31000, Basel III for banks, the NIST risk management framework, Sarbanes-Oxley, all recognize risk categories that go well beyond those 3. Apogee organizes the full risk landscape into 12 domains grouped into 3 tiers. Tier 1, causal pillars, cascading failures start. Tier 2, consequence and structural domains, where nexus failures show up as measurable impact. And Tier 3, the environmental domains, external pressures that constrain or amplify risk across everything else. Tier 1 is the 3 pillars I just described: cyber, physical security, people. Cyber, the reason this lives at the board level is clear. Mandatory assessment under the major frameworks, the NIST cybersecurity framework, cybersecurity maturity model certification, or CMMC, for defense contractors, HIPAA for healthcare, payment card industry standard for anyone handling credit card data, and Sarbanes-Oxley IT controls for public companies. Physical security, the reason this lives at the board level is direct safety liability, operational disruption, and the cyber exposure that comes from physical and digital systems converging. People. I want to spend an extra moment here. This is the most underassessed category in risk management today. The human factor is the root cause or a primary contributor in the majority of security incidents and organizational crises. Every serious incident response retrospective I took part in during my time with the FBI and during my time in the private sector traced back at some stage in the chain to a people failure. Training, culture, succession, leadership competency under crisis. People is the pillar most organizations underinvest in. It's also the pillar that most consistently determines the outcome. Tier 2 is where nexus failures show up as measurable impact. 6 domains: operational, multi-site execution, service delivery, business continuity, process resilience, vendor reliability. Financial, funding pipeline, access to capital, readiness for mergers or acquisitions. Technology, firmware, software integrity, cloud dependencies, interoperability. Safety, workplace hazard exposure, product safety, environmental liability. Strategic, market access, growth execution, the viability of business model itself. Reputation, how incidents get amplified. Here's the point I want you to hold on to. Each one of these tier 2 domains connects back to pillars through clear chains of cause and effect. Cascading cyber or physical failures show up as operational disruption. Operational disruption translates directly into financial loss. Your total risk exposure shapes strategic positioning and investor confidence. This isn't a lose list, it's a consequence map. Tier 3 is environmental. 3 domains. These are external pressures that constrain or amplify risk across every other domain at the same time. Compliance and regulatory, federal and state mandates, conflicts between different jurisdictions, audit readiness, industry-specific rules, cybersecurity standards for electrical utilities. A compliance failure doesn't just produce a fine, it triggers a financial, operational, and reputational consequence at the same time. What about supply chain? Reliance on a single source, due diligence on counterparties. Modern supply chains, and I mean every one of them, introduce cyber, physical, and people risk through connected logistics and vendor access. And the third, geopolitical and national security, the lane that I lived in for the vast majority of my career. Items like foreign investment review, data sovereignty, sanctions compliance, political risk, and the places you operate and where your people operate. This domain acts as a structural accelerator. It raises the baseline severity across the whole picture at the same time. A geopolitical shift doesn't affect one domain, it affects all of them. Here's the full picture. 3 causal pillars, 6 consequence and structural domains, 3 environmental domains, 12 domains in total. 3 pillars are the analytical engine. They tell you where failure starts. 12 domains make sure every risk category that matters at the board level is addressed, scored, and monitored explicitly. Nothing falls off the dashboard because nobody owned it. Let me show you a second example. This one drawn from the industrial sector. A firmware flaw. A vulnerability in industrial control systems gets exploited by an outside attacker. A coordination failure. IT and maintenance didn't coordinate a patch window. A production site is harmed through a safety incident. The link to the cyber problem is now obvious. A regulatory probe. Investigators open an inquiry. 6 domains are now in play. Cyber, operational, technology, safety, compliance, and reputation. Only 2 of those 6 were visible to the siloed assessment that came before the event. That's why 12 domain framework exists, not for the sake of completeness, but practical necessity, to make sure the full chain of consequences is visible for the event that triggers it. Visibility is the number one challenge of risk managers. I want to speak directly to a specific slice of this audience. I asked the enterprise executives on the call to pay attention, equal attention to this, because this applies to your suppliers, your portfolio companies, and your mission partners. Large enterprises can absorb the inefficiency of siloed risk management. They have dedicated teams, they have overlapping mandates, they have the budget to carry 3 separate programs at the same time. Small and medium-sized businesses can't. Public sector agencies can't. They cannot do this. They face the same threat landscape, in many cases a more severe one, because attackers see them as softer targets with a fraction of the resources. Year over year, reports of adversarial activity show that the small to medium-sized businesses in the global public sector are the main targets of adversarial activity in the cyber lanes, and you can bring up additional data to show that from the physical security standpoint, it is naturally assumed by an adversary that a small or medium-sized businesses will not necessarily have controls in place that might prevent them from adversarial activity. For these organizations, the Nexus framework isn't an academic distinction. It can be, if chosen, a force multiplier. One integrated engagement replaces three separate ones. It closes the gaps between them, and it produces a single risk picture across all 12 domains that leadership can actually act on. That's the economic argument. It's also the governance argument, because the boards of small and mid-sized businesses and the leaders of public agencies are held to the same standard of care with none of the cushion. Let me walk you through how we put this into practice. 5 phases. Phase 1, unified discovery and intake. Single team conducts the intake across all 3 pillars at the same time, one operating picture from day 1, not 3 assessments stitched together at the end. Phase 2, intersection analysis. This is where we map how the domains affect each other, identify the risks that emerge at the intersections, trace the direct downstream effects across all 12 domains. I'll come back to this phase in a moment because this is where the framework earns its keep. Phase 3, integrated risk scoring. We score risk using a single approach that accounts for how they amplify each other across domains. 5 dimensions. I'll come back to this one too. Phase 4, a single roadmap for fixes. One sequenced action plan. Every fix is evaluated for its effect across all 12 domains at the same time, so that addressing a cyber risk doesn't accidentally create a safety risk, and a physical control doesn't produce a compliance exposure. Phase 5, ongoing risk governance, an integrated risk dashboard, a cross-domain risk committee, quarterly Nexus reviews, continuous monitoring across the whole picture. 5 phases, 1 operating picture. The result is what boards have been asking for, and what the siloed model has been built to prevent them from getting. Let me take you into phase 2, intersection analysis. This is the proprietary work that sets the Nexus framework apart from a conventional assessment. 4 separate work streams that cover cross-domain dependency mapping, cascading failure modeling, attack chain reconstruction, 12 domain consequence mapping. We trace each intersection, finding through all 9 of the other domains to quantify the downstream financial, operational, and reputational and compliance impact. The deliverable is what we call the Nexus Risk Map. It's a visual and narrative document, presents the organization's risk landscape as a single integrated whole across all 12 domains, with intersection risk identified, scored, and prioritized. Intersection risk scoring measures the severity of the risks that only exist at the intersections. Subsequently, our rogue risk analysis group checks those findings against real-time threat intelligence and external risk signals. Phase 3, integrated risk scoring. I want to name a specific predictable failure mode of conventional risk assessment. Conventional scoring treats each finding on its own. A medium in one domain, a medium in another, each one pushed down the priority list on its own merits, when their combination is actually a critical intersection exposure. That's the failure mode, and it's systemic. It isn't an edge case. Our scoring uses 5 dimensions: likelihood, probability that it gets exploited, impact, the severity of the consequence, velocity, how fast the risk becomes real once triggered, interconnectedness, how many other findings this one is connected to and how strongly. The more connected it is, the more it can amplify everything else. And then remediation leverage. How much exposure one fix reduces across multiple domains at the same time. The fixes with the highest leverage go to the top of the list. That last one, remediation leverage, is where the approach delivers the most tangible value. Because when your board asks of a limited budget, where do we spend first? Remediation leverage gives you the answer, empirically, not by intuition. We have a unique technology stack at Apogee. Most of it is internally built, Some of it is obtained through partner relationships that we have on the market. I'm not going to spend a ton of time reviewing in detail, but what we've done with our own internal development team and staff we've built platforms that we think answer the mail on the necessary risk challenges that small businesses face. So these platforms are built for the small business environment, and they bring together all of the various risk areas that we've outlined into separate platforms by name. They're all interconnected and share intelligence and information. For clarity, the three service pillars that we operate in at Apogee are enterprise risk operations, strategy and organizational resilience, and talent advisory and human capital risk. 3 pillars, full spectrum coverage. Every engagement begins with a Nexus assessment and then moves into whichever pillars the findings call for. I want to close with an observation, and it's the observation I hope you carry out of this event and recording. If IT talks to IT, if facilities talks only to facilities, if HR only talks to HR, you have a Nexus gap. The most consequential risk your organization faces right now isn't a cyber incident. It isn't even a physical breach. It isn't a people failure in isolation. It's the absence of any individual, any team, any governance mechanism responsible for seeing these risks as connected, and then tracing their consequences across the full 12-domain picture your board, your investors, your regulators expect you to govern. The Nexus of Risk framework gives you the method, the platforms, and the governance to close that gap. I want to leave you with one question. At your next leadership meeting, please ask this question of the team. Where does our cyber risk program end, and where does our physical security program begin? And who owns space in between those two programs? If the answer is silence, you've identified your most significant risk exposure. The Nexus of Risk framework that I've just given you some highlights about is grounded in established theory. It's put into practice through a method our practitioners have built. It's powered by proprietary technology, and it's organized around 12 governance domains that satisfy the requirements of any board, investors, auditors, underwriters, and regulators. My team and I are available to walk any organization through what a Nexus assessment looks like in practice. Contact information is on the screen. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.